A violent stormy night at Windsor Castle. The wind lashes against the ancient stone walls that have witnessed hundreds of years of history. The whole world is asleep, completely unaware that inside the heart of the British royal family, a supreme secret has just been erased. One document, the final will, an absolute secret, of Queen Elizabeth II. It did not disappear because it was misplaced, not because of an administrative error. It was destroyed, burned to ashes, and the person suspected of standing behind that act is the very woman standing beside the new king. Camilla. For the following 18 months, Buckingham Palace sank into an unusual silence. No announcement, no correction, no official explanation, only scattered signs. Ashes discovered in a place where documents are never permitted to be burned. Internal emails vanished from the royal server system. Staff members who witnessed the incident were suddenly transferred or resigned without reason. And King Charles, a man growing increasingly withdrawn, increasingly distant, as if carrying a truth that could never be spoken aloud. At first, the disappearance of the document was described as an error, then as a misunderstanding, but the questions never stopped emerging. Why was the will not properly archived? Why were security logs altered? And why? During a private confrontation behind closed doors, King Charles was said to have looked directly at Camilla and spoken only one word: betrayal. This is not merely a marital crisis. This is loyalty to the memory of a queen who devoted her entire life to duty. It is the moral boundary of power, and it is the greatest question of all. Whether Camilla was willing to erase the legacy of Queen Elizabeth to protect her own position as queen consort. Do you believe this is an unforgivable truth? Leave comment number 1 if you believe Camilla betrayed, or number 2 if you believe King Charles was too harsh. Your comment will determine the next direction of our investigation. But to understand how everything reached this point, we must turn back time to the moment that document vanished. The Royal Archives, considered the very heart of the memory of the British royal family, a space buried deep beneath Windsor Castle, guarded more strictly than the national gold reserves. Every door requires multiple layers of verification. Every movement is recorded. Every document carries its own archive code, access history, and list of authorized individuals. In this place, the concept of misplacement does not exist. Only records, or violations. Inventory procedures at the Royal Archives operate on a fixed cycle, no exceptions. Even during periods of national mourning, every document belonging to the category of royal wills is manually checked by 2 independent teams. One team verifies the physical record. One team cross-checks the system. The smallest discrepancy is immediately reported to the highest level of the royal household. And then, during what seemed like a routine internal review, the silence was shattered. One file did not appear. Not a single page, not an appendix, but the entire document, the final secret will of Queen Elizabeth II. A document that existed in only one original copy. No backups, no digital version. And known to only an extremely limited number of people, the true shock lies here. The document had been missing for 18 months. 18 months passed, without anyone speaking up. No report, no inquiry, no questions raised. That could only happen if everyone who knew about the document remained silent, or was forced into silence. An internal investigation was launched quietly. No police, no press release. Only a high-level security team summoned directly by the king. They began with what cannot lie: entry logs, card scan data, security cameras. And it was here that one detail caused the entire room to fall into silence. During the period of national mourning, the Royal Archives were nearly frozen. All non-essential activity was suspended. Yet the system recorded 2 unusual access events. The same group of people, the same sensitive time frame. The first individual, Camilla. The second, Laura, her daughter. There was no legitimate reason recorded. No administrative request, no directive from the king, no emergency approval, yet they were still able to enter, twice. While the entire nation was bowing its head to bid farewell to the queen, while the royal family was at its most fragile state, emotionally and institutionally, the security cameras do not record sound. But images do not lie. The footage shows Camilla and Laura entering the archive area with a calm demeanor. No haste, no secrecy, as if they believed no one would dare to question them. When they left, they carried an unusual item, not a standard archive container, no seal code, not logged in any catalog. That detail sent a chill through the investigation team, because at the Royal Archives, every document must be transported in specialized containers, with markings, signatures, and dedicated camera tracking. The material Camilla carried did not match any standard. It resembled a thick paper bundle, held close to the body, like something that was never permitted to leave that place. When the report was placed before King Charles, he did not react immediately. Those present later recalled that he remained silent for a very long time. No anger, no interrogation. He simply stared at the screen, watching the same footage again and again, the moment the woman he trusted most walked out of the Royal Archives with something she was never allowed to remove. For Charles, that was the moment every assumption collapsed. He had believed the disappearance of the document was a mistake, an administrative error during a period of chaos. He had believed no one in his own family could cross that line, but the images before him no longer allowed him to believe. And that was only the beginning. As the investigation continued to dig deeper, even more alarming gaps emerged. Brief periods when cameras were temporarily disabled, system logs manually altered, and most importantly, there was no record of the document ever being returned. As if it had left the Royal Archives permanently, from that moment on, the question was no longer whether the document had been taken, but why, and for what purpose, and who dared to decide that the final legacy of Queen Elizabeth could be erased without the consent of the king. At that point, Charles still could not fully accept the truth, but when he watched the footage one last time, he was frozen, because in Camilla's eyes, there was no hesitation. Only resolve. And he understood that the truth was far greater than a family crisis. And that was only the beginning. The truth about the secret will did not emerge from the press, not from rumor, but from a source beyond dispute. The final private secretary of Queen Elizabeth, the person who stood beside her in her final weeks, the person who directly witnessed the moment the document was drafted, signed, sealed, and classified at the highest security level of the British royal family. According to confirmation from this secretary, the private will was created only 3 weeks before the Queen passed away. It was not a financial will. It did not concern money. It did not divide personal interests. This was an institutional guidance document, a final instruction addressed solely to the future king. Charles. The Queen understood very clearly that the public was watching her. She knew she had publicly supported Camilla becoming queen consort. She also understood that any doubt at that moment could have caused national division, but what the public never saw was the private side, where the Queen did not speak as a symbol, but as the final guardian of the monarchy, and it was there that serious reservations appeared. Elizabeth did not oppose the title of queen consort, but she imposed 3 strict binding conditions. Conditions that existed only within a document of the highest classification, not to be copied, not to be quoted, not to be interpreted outside its context. The first condition: Camilla must never interfere in matters of succession. No statements, no guidance, no indirect influence on the line of inheritance. All issues related to succession belonged solely to the king and the royal council, with no exceptions. The second condition: Camilla's role in state activities must be limited. No representation of the monarchy at strategic events. No participation in sensitive diplomatic decisions. No appearance as a parallel center of power. Queen consort was a supportive position, not a co-ruler. And the third condition, the most severe of all, Camilla's role depended entirely on her respect for the institution, not emotion, not title, not marriage, but absolute adherence to the foundational values the monarchy had protected for hundreds of years. If that boundary were crossed, all authority could be reconsidered. When Charles read this will for the first time, according to the private secretary, he remained silent for a long time. No rebuttal, no argument, only a quiet nod, because he recognized his mother's voice, clear, controlled, unsentimental, and unambiguous. Charles recalled a sentence Elizabeth once said to him on a rare afternoon without ceremony. She said that some things, if not written down, would forever become disputes, and when disputes erupt, the institution is the first to be harmed. That was why she wanted to record it, not to control her son, but to protect the monarchy from future conflicts. The greatest shock lay in the complete contrast between the public image and the private content. Before the public, Elizabeth showed absolute support, without hesitation, without conditions. But within the document of the highest classification, she wrote with great clarity that such support came with binding constraints. It was not unconditional trust. It was a protective mechanism. And this is precisely why that will could never exist publicly. If it remained intact, Camilla would be bound legally and morally at the highest level. Any action crossing the boundary could be examined under the light of the will. Any intervention could be questioned for legitimacy. The position of Queen Consort would no longer be absolutely secure. As the investigation team assembled the fragments, a disturbing picture gradually emerged. The time when the will was created, the time when Camilla and Laura appeared at the Royal Archives, and the time when the document vanished. All fell within the same sensitive period, when power was transitioning, when emotion overwhelmed reason, and when a single act could erase all constraints. If that will was destroyed, there would be no document, no evidence, no officially recorded boundary. Elizabeth conditions would exist only in the memory of a few individuals. And memory cannot be used to bind power. Charles understood this better than anyone, because he knew how careful his mother had been when writing every sentence. He understood that it was not personal suspicion, but the instinct of a queen who had spent her entire life witnessing how power can distort human nature. And at that very moment, Charles realized that the disappearance of the will was not merely a procedural violation, not merely a personal shock, but a direct attack on the final will of Queen Elizabeth. If the will remained intact, Camilla would be bound, but it was destroyed. Ashes cannot speak. Burned paper cannot defend itself. And the only question left now is the one no one dares to answer publicly. Who had the greatest motive to erase those constraints? Who understood the content well enough to know it could not be allowed to exist? And who was willing to cross the final line to protect her position as Queen Consort? The answer is slowly emerging, and what lies ahead will be far harsher. The investigation did not stop at suspicion. When the Royal Archives confirmed the document had vanished, when footage showed Camilla and Laura leaving the archive with unauthorized material, the next step was what no one within the monarchy desired. Forensic analysis. Cold. Precise. Without emotion. Without regard for status. The Royal Cybersecurity Team was quietly assembled, with no official name, leaving no public record. Their mission was singular: to recover what had been erased. Because in the digital world, deletion never truly means disappearance. They began with internal servers accessed during the period of national mourning. Personal devices granted special clearance. Accounts that logged into the royal internal messaging system. And then, after only a few days of analysis, a chain of emails was partially restored. Not complete, but enough to chill anyone who read it. One short message, without emotion, without explanation, without detours, sent only days after the funeral of Queen Elizabeth. Its content consisted of a single sentence. Yes. Take care of it completely. No trace. It did not mention the document. It did not mention the will. It did not need to. Within the context of time and sender and recipient, its meaning cannot be denied. Take care of it completely. Handle it fully. No trace. Leave nothing behind. Digital forensic experts confirmed. This email was manually deleted. Not an automatic deletion. Not a system error. But a deliberate act. The sender knew exactly what was being done. And more importantly, that person believed every trace had been completely erased. But they were wrong. Because alongside the digital evidence, a physical forensic investigation was also conducted. At an old fireplace area within an adjacent space at Windsor, a location that had been used in a limited manner during the period of national mourning. The investigation team collected an unusual amount of ash. Not much, but sufficient for analysis. The results left everyone frozen. The ash did not come from ordinary paper. Not handwritten paper. Not standard office-printed documents. This was high-grade royal paper, specially produced, containing distinctive security fibers with a unique chemical composition, used only for documents classified at the highest level of the British royal family. In other words, what was burned could not have been an ordinary document. It had to be an official record, a document that was never permitted to leave the royal archives, and even more so, never permitted to be destroyed in this manner. At this point, the investigation was no longer speculative. It began to take a clear form: time, place, method, and motive, but the most critical piece was still missing: a witness. And then, someone spoke. Not a senior official, not a royal advisor, but a technical staff member responsible for internal facilities, a person who was present at Windsor on the very day the incident occurred, a person who had remained silent for 18 months. According to this witness, Laura was the one who directly requested the preparation of fire, not for heating, not for any ritual, but as a private request, delivered in a tone that did not accept refusal. After that, Laura asked to remain alone for approximately 30 minutes. Camilla was not in the room. No one else was permitted to enter. 30 minutes. In a space with a burning chamber, at the very moment a high-level document had just disappeared. Those 30 minutes became the most chilling interval in the entire file. The witness stated that when Laura left, the smell of burned paper still lingered in the air. Not the smell of wood, not the smell of fuel, but a very distinctive scent of chemically treated paper, a scent only those with long experience inside the royal system would recognize. This witness did not dare to report it immediately, because of who was involved, because of the consequences that could follow. But when the internal investigation began, when evidence started to accumulate, this person understood that continued silence was also a form of guilt. And the most shocking fact lies here. For 18 months, no one was exposed, no one was questioned, no external authority was informed. A nearly perfect cover-up. But no plan is ever absolutely perfect. Physical evidence cannot erase itself. Ash remains. Emails, even when deleted, still leave traces. Systems, even when altered, retain histories. And people, even when silent, still carry memory. When everything was placed on the table, Charles no longer read the reports as a king, but as a son, a husband, and a man facing the harshest truth of his life. There was no room left for justification, no space for misunderstanding. The evidence did not stand alone. It overlapped. It reinforced itself. Directive email, royal paper ash. Direct witness, a perfectly aligned timeline. And the most painful part for Charles was not the act of burning the document, but the coldness with which it was carried out. No hesitation, no panic, no emotion, only decision and execution. This was not an impulsive act. This was a plan, with direction, with an executor, with carefully chosen timing, and with a single objective: to erase constraints, to erase legacy, to erase the conditions Queen Elizabeth had left behind. 18 months of concealment. 18 months to let everything settle, to allow power to be consolidated, to ensure no one dared to dig into the past. But royal history never forgets. It only waits for the right moment to return. And when all final evidence was confirmed, Charles understood that he no longer had a choice. He could not remain silent. He could not pretend not to know. He could not protect one person by betraying the final will of his mother. The evidence was now undeniable. Not a single fragment, but an entire chain that could not be refuted. And at this point, Charles was no longer an observer. He was compelled to act, compelled to confront directly. With Camilla and with Laura, because the truth had crossed the boundary of a family secret. It had become a moral crisis, a test of power, and a moment that would define the entire reign. And that was when the closed door prepared to open for an unavoidable confrontation. Clarence's house was submerged in a rare and heavy atmosphere. There was no ceremony, no assistants, no advisors. Only 3 people inside the sealed room: King Charles, Camilla, and Laura. The door closed, and with it, every layer of royal protection disappeared. Charles did not evade the issue. He did not begin with emotion. He began with facts. Each file was placed on the table, each piece of evidence presented slowly. Camera footage, access logs, restored emails, ash analysis, witness testimony. There was no rushed accusation, only a sequence of facts that could not be denied. Camilla listened in silence. Her face hardened. At first came denial. She said it was a misunderstanding, that she had never ordered the burning of any document, that she did not know the true content of the will, that everything had been exaggerated. But when Charles opened the restored email, when the sentence, "Yes, take care of it completely," no trace appeared before her. Camilla no longer looked at him. She turned toward Laura. Only then did Laura speak. Her voice trembled but did not panic. She admitted that she was the one who proposed it, that she believed the will would harm the monarchy, that it would weaken Camilla's position, that in the fragile period after the Queen passed away, such a document would bring only division. Camilla seized upon that argument. She said she had been hurt and angry. She spoke of years of contempt, of suspicious looks, of whispers behind her back. She said the will was a hidden humiliation, a doubt never spoken publicly, and that she only wanted to protect the institution, not destroy it. Charles listened, but his expression did not change. When Camilla stopped, he asked a single question framed as a statement, that she had decided to replace his mother, a woman who had reigned for 70 years, simply because she felt hurt. The room fell into absolute silence, because it struck at the core of the matter, not the will, not the paper, but who had the right to decide what for the monarchy. Charles said that he could understand emotion, but he could not accept the action, because Elizabeth did not write the will out of personal feeling. She wrote it as queen, with the responsibility to protect the institution from internal conflict, and no one, not even the queen consort, had the right to erase that will. The argument escalated. Camilla mentioned Diana. She said that Charles had once allowed emotion to guide him, had once allowed the monarchy to fall into crisis because of wrong decisions in the past. She said that this time she only did what was necessary to avoid repeating tragedy. Charles stood up. His voice was low but sharp. He said, "Do not use Diana to justify betrayal." He said what she had done was not protection, but seizure of authority, not loyalty. But crossing the boundary, Laura tried to intervene, but Charles raised his hand to stop her. He said the issue was no longer who proposed it, but who agreed, who understood the consequences, and who still chose to proceed. Camilla no longer denied it. She only said that if the will existed, she would forever be seen with suspicion, that she would never truly be accepted, and that she could not live her entire life under the shadow of a document the public would never see. Charles looked at her for a long time. Then he said the sentence that ended everything. "I cannot stay married to someone who would do this." There was no shouting, no pounding of the table, no drama, but it was the coldest moment in the room, because it was not only the words of a husband, it was the declaration of a king. A man who understood that some actions cannot be undone, and some trust once broken can never be restored. Camilla was left frozen. She tried to say something, but there were no words left that could fit. Laura broke down in tears. But Charles had already turned away. He said that this marriage could not continue if its foundation was the betrayal of the final will of the Queen. He said that this was not a decision made in a single night, but the result of 18 months of silence, 18 months of reflection, and 18 months of facing the truth day after day. The confrontation ended not with the sound of a door slammed shut, but with emptiness. Camilla remained seated. Laura fell silent. And Charles left Clarence House with the posture of a man who had chosen duty over emotion. The decision had been made. It could not be reversed. It could not be softened by compromise. But what awaited ahead was the real storm. Because when a king chooses truth over protecting his family, the consequences do not remain behind closed doors. And that was the moment the story moved into its next chapter, where consequences began to spread, and no one could stand outside of it. Only 48 hours after the confrontation at Clarence House, the very thing the British royal family had always feared most occurred. Information began to leak. Not the full story. No specific details. Just fragmented signals. But enough for the media to understand that a serious upheaval had erupted at the highest level of power. Royal editors received the same message. An unprecedented marital crisis. Not an affair. Not a third party. But a fracture of institutional nature. And that made every speculation far more dangerous. Buckingham Palace responded in the most familiar way. A brief statement, cold, vague, without emotion, irreconcilable differences. No explanation, no denial, no confirmation of details. But in royal language, this was the final full stop. Within hours, the statement was dissected word by word, because everyone understood that when the royal family chose to say the least, the truth behind it was usually what they could not say. Immediately after, quiet but unmistakable changes began to unfold. Camilla disappeared from the public schedule. She no longer appeared beside the king. She no longer attended national events. She no longer hosted diplomatic receptions. The title Queen Consort gradually vanished from internal documents. According to palace sources, Camilla officially reverted to the title Duchess of Cornwall, a step back never publicly announced, but universally understood. This was not merely a change of title. It was a withdrawal from the center of power, a silent acknowledgement that her role within the royal family had ended. Camilla left London. No farewell, no images, no personal statement. A disappearance entirely consistent with how the palace wished this story to pass. In silence, the reactions of family members quickly became visible through unofficial signals. Prince William was said to feel relief, not because of his father's marriage ending, but because a long-standing source of tension had finally come to a close. For many years, William was believed to have harbored concerns about boundaries of power and influence. Now, those boundaries had been decisively re-established. The most unexpected response came from Harry. According to those close to him, Harry initiated contact with Charles himself, not to assign blame, not to reopen old wounds, but to offer support, a brief conversation, but one of significant meaning. For the first time in many years, the father-son relationship was described as thawing, not fully reconciled, but enough to open a door to dialogue. For Charles, the consequences extended beyond family. He acted immediately. The royal archives were placed under a new security regime. Access procedures were tightened to an unprecedented level. No exceptions. No special privileges. No gray zone between family and institution. More importantly, Charles issued directives to reform regulations concerning royal wills. Any document carrying institutional guidance would now require multiple copies, stored at different locations, under independent layers of security. No single individual would ever again be able to erase the will of the monarchy unilaterally. This was a change of historical significance, because it was born from loss. Not the loss of power, but the loss of trust. The greatest shock to the public did not lie in the fact that a divorce occurred. The royal family had endured that before. It lay in the cause. A marriage spanning decades, a relationship that had weathered countless storms, ultimately collapsed. Because of a single document, a will, and a silent act of destruction. No one could imagine that a single piece of paper could bring down an entire structure of family and power in such a way. Yet that reality reflects most clearly the true nature of the British royal family. A place where written words carry more weight than spoken promises. A place where documents matter more than emotion. And a place where the erasure of history always comes at a cost. For Charles, the decision to divorce was not a victory. It was a sacrifice. He lost a life partner, but preserved the final will of his mother. He chose duty, even when the price was solitude. This story does not end with applause. There is no winner, no clear loser, only a cold reality, that within the royal family, no one stands above the institution. And anyone who forgets that, regardless of position, will ultimately face the consequences. And that is the greatest shock of all. A marriage collapsed. A role was stripped away. A reign was put to the test, all because of a document that was destroyed. Yet the aftershocks have not stopped. A bitter paradox hangs over this entire story. For decades, King Charles was the one who stood up to protect Camilla, against public opinion, against the royal family, and even against history itself. He accepted criticism. He accepted damage to his personal image. He accepted the loss of public affection, all to keep the woman he loved by his side. And yet, in the end, it was he who chose to end that marriage, not because love had faded, but because Camilla crossed a line he could not forgive. Betrayal of the institution. Ironically, that choice mirrors the very path his mother once walked. Queen Elizabeth repeatedly placed duty above personal emotion. She believed the monarchy could only survive if every member understood their limits. Charles was deeply shaped by that philosophy, and in the end, he was forced to make the same decision. Painful, but necessary. The lesson left behind is not only for the royal family, it applies to any system built on trust. Power cannot function without honesty, and affection cannot endure when its foundation is concealment. Trust is not something spoken aloud. It is something proven through action. And once broken, no ceremony is strong enough to restore it. In a private exchange that followed, Charles was reportedly heard to say a brief but heavy sentence: "Some betrayals cannot be forgiven, not because of resentment, but because forgiveness in this case would demand the collapse of an entire institution." How deeply did this story shock you? Did it leave you feeling regret, anger, or sadness? Share your true emotions in the comments below. Like if you want us to continue the Royal Secrets series, and do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next royal revelations. Thank you for staying with us until the final moment. We look forward to seeing you again in stories where truth is always more costly than power.